Hello and welcome to the Death Guard series, the series where we go from your first purchase to your first 2,000 point army list and everything in between for the Chaos Forces of the Death Guard. And the time has finally come where we start looking at different list builds for the Death Guard forces. In this video we'll be looking at a couple different 500 point lists, though do keep in mind this video is designed more to get you thinking about how you can build different lists and different themes and different purchases you can incorporate, and these lists should not be taken as completely optimized builds that are going to be the best you can have, but rather once again this is more of a thought experiment than anything else to get you going in the right direction. So with that being said, let's take a look at the first list within this video. The first list will be a patrol detachment being composed of the Harbingers Plague Company, and this will be the budget list as you'll soon see. To begin with, the HQ choice for this detachment is the character known as Typhus, who will be the warlord of this army, and he'll be given the warlord trait known as Shamblerot. And in addition to his Shamblerot ability, he has two different psychic powers, so let's go with something like Plague Winds and Gift of Plagues. The Gift of the Plagues allows him to extend the range of different contagions, while the Plague Wind gives him some mortal wound output. Inversely, you can consider something like Curse of the Leper, but I think you'll be okay dealing with most small targets, as you'll see when we look at the rest of this list. For the troop choices, this list will include two different troop choices, the first one being a unit of 7 Plague Marines being armed with a Flail of Corruption and a Blight Launcher. The reason for this odd assortment of different armaments is because it's actually kind of viable considering that the Plague Marines do rather well within combat and the Blight Launcher simply gives them a little extra output as they make their way into combat. However, it's also to soak up the last few points, as it's rather hard to utilize the last 10 points within any given Death Guard list, so when you do have a couple points laying around, it's never bad to spend on some more gear to give yourself a little bit more range capabilities. After this troop choice, there is yet another troop choice being a unit of 20 Poxwalkers. This unit is a rather durable one, they'll work rather well with Typhus and can set objectives rather well as benefiting from the Harbingers Plague Company. And don't forget you have something like the Mutant Strange Stratagem that really can take those Poxwalkers to the next level against tougher targets. Now finally the list wraps up with one elite choice, being the Biologus Putrefier. And this Biologus Putrefier will be given a special relic known as the Plague Skull of Glothilla. And this weapon helps generate mortal wounds, considering this list can generate quite a few of them, thanks to that swarm of Poxwalkers with their mutant strain and the ability for the Biologus to power up those Plague Marines. Don't forget the Shamblerot and the Plague Winds or the Curse of the Leper. And all this makes this a very high mortal wound output list that does give you quite a few models to work with, even though those Poxwalkers are a rather soft target. Though with all the different ways of bringing them back into the game, they're going to be a lot harder for your opponents to destroy than it may first appear. The Plague Marines and the Biologus Putrefier are also rather powerful, and you essentially end up with two sections to this army list, the first being Typhus with the Poxwalkers, and the second being the Biologus Putrefier with the Plague Marines. And these two different units can be spread out to work in different ways, with each of the respective characters benefiting the unit that they're escorting. This can give you a decent amount of board presence, something that Death Guard may have trouble with at times when it comes to smaller games such as this. Now let's take a look at the different kits you'll need to build this list. As this is our budget list, all you'll need is one kit, being the Combat Patrol. And the Combat Patrol would cost you a total of $140. However, you can find many stores, they'll give you a 15% discount or better, meaning you can potentially find it for $119, which is a rather reasonable price point of entry when you consider the number of models you're getting. And do keep in mind that you also get an additional 10 Poxwalkers for when you're ready to expand your army, considering you can't bring a second unit of Poxwalkers as you're limited to the number of Plague Marines, Terminators, and Possessed that you have in a list. But when you do go to expand your army, they do make for an excellent inclusion, as oftentimes you'll want many units of Poxwalkers. And as such, I think this is a decent enough introductory list that lets you play around with the different options that the Death Guard give you access to. Now for the second list, we're going to look at something a little bit different, as I like to include a variety of different lists within videos such as this, so people can best choose the list that best fits their type of playstyle that they enjoy. The second list will begin with a patrol detachment, as the first list did, and in this case, it will take the Inexorable Plague Company. This list begins with an HQ choice, being a generic Chaos Lord, who will be your warlord, and will be given both the warlord trait and the relic in this situation. This time around, this warlord gets the Ferric Blight ability and the Plague Skull of Glothilla. And if you're wondering why you're seeing this relic so often, well, it's a rather nice generic relic that does enough damage to your opponent that it's generally easy enough to include within a variety of different lists, making it kind of the most generic option that you can bring along. However, once you get into larger games, you'll see a bigger variety of different relics, as all of a sudden you have access to different voted variants who have their various special relics, and as such you'll see less Plague Skulls. However, it'll still show up rather commonly, as it's just one of those nice generic inclusions that you can bring along with any list and make good use of. Now, we've also given this Chaos Lord a combat Melta, and this once again is just a way to soak up a few points. And moving on from the HQ choice, we come to the first troop choice of this army list, that being a unit of 5 Plague Marines being armed with one special weapon, that being the Blight Launcher. And this Blight Launcher is a rather good range weapon that you can bring on your different Plague Marines and Blight Lord Terminator units to great success, as it can actually do a serious amount of damage while allowing you to still be rather mobile with your different Death Guard forces, who can be a rather slow moving force due to their low base movement speed. Now, we continue on with this list with an elite choice being a unit of 3 Death Shroud Terminators that have no upgrades. The Death Shroud Terminators make a great inclusion for any list that is looking for a solid melee threat that can also deal with swarms thanks to their Plague Spurt gauntlets. This unit will be an absolute monster in melee against pretty much any other unit due to their dual profiles that they bring to the table. And one other thing to keep in mind is because they can deep strike into the game, they can actually take up a position rather well and be a rather big annoyance for your opponent, who will have to deal with the various advancing range threats while the Death Shroud either hold an objective or teleport behind them and begin advancing forward, thus pinching your enemies between the two different forces that they're about to contend with. Now finally, this list does bring one other unit, that being a fast attack choice of the Mephitic Blight Hauler. And the Mephitic Blight Hauler is definitely a decent enough unit when it comes to firepower output, and it complements the Blight Launcher as well as benefits rather well from the Ferric Blight if you can position that Chaos Lord correctly. So now let's look at what the different kits are needed to build out this list. Well, the number one thing you might notice right away is that all of this can be built out of the Battle Force box that is coming in December. However, if you're watching this video after the Battle Force box is no longer available, you can still buy all of the components individually. That being a box of Plague Marines, which you can proxy a Chaos Lord out of, and that will cost you $50, a box of Death Shroud Terminators, which would cost you $60, and one box of Mephitic Blight Haulers, which will run you $25, as it's one of the cheapest units within the game, considering how big of a unit it is. Now the total cost adds up to $135, even with this assortment of kits, meaning that it's a little less expensive than the Combat Patrol box. So in a way, this is a budget list in itself, and with that 15% discount, it'll only run you $115. One thing to mention is that you can also do different things with this list to reduce the price even further. For example, if you take those Death Shroud Terminators, you can definitely replace them with another Mephitic Blight Hauler and consider another special weapon for your unit of Plague Marines. Though if you go down this route, you do end up having a rather small amount of models on the tabletop, and thus you expose yourself to a few risks that opponents can take advantage of. However, the Mephitic Blight Hauler is an incredibly durable unit with just enough good firepower to make it a reasonable enough swap out, so that is something you can do to make this list a little more shooty and a little more focused on different vehicles. You can also decide to take out the Death Shroud Terminators, remove the Blight Launcher from the Marines and the Combat Melter on the champion, and then take along a Plague Burst Crawler. That Plague Burst Crawler will definitely be an interesting centerpiece model, but once again, you do reduce your model count rather heavily. However, once again, the Plague Burst Crawler is a very formidable threat and can do quite a lot of damage. And with that being said, do keep in mind that if you buy the Battle Force, you can build any of those lists utilizing what's included within the Battle Force box. Not only that, but that Battle Force box will give you at least a 1,000-point army, considering this army is already 500 points, and you still have leftover Marines, 2 Blight Haulers, and a Plague Burst Crawler within that box. As such, it definitely is a very interesting Battle Force box, and if it's reasonably priced, or you can find it for a reasonable price after the fact, it's definitely something you should look into because the models within it are rather impressive. And even if you don't really consider the Battle Force box, considering how inexpensive the Blight Hauler is in terms of dollars when compared to its points cost, you do get the ability to build a rather inexpensive 500-point list using 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers and a box of Plague Marines, which further reduces in cost once you apply some of the discounts that some of the smaller hobby retailers will give you for shopping with them, as oftentimes you can find rather amazing deals shopping around with different retailers in comparison to going to Games Workshop directly. And finally, we come to our third and final list, being another patrol detachment composed of the Mortarion's Anvil Plague Company. And as this is a Mortarion's Anvil Plague Company, this list is going to be a lot more melee focused than the other two lists. So let's begin with our HQ choice. In this case, we'll bring along a Demon Prince of Nurgle, being the warlord of this army, and we'll arm him with a Hellforged sword as well as a pair of wings to increase his mobility. Because remember, if you can't get into combat, your melee weapons aren't going to be doing anything in comparison to your shooting weapons. Now, as for a trait and a relic, we're going to give him one of each. The Warlord trait being the Mortarion's Anvil Special Contagion, which will be Glooming Bloat, and this will help prevent your opponent from firing Overwatch as well as being less effective in melee against your Demon Prince. As for the relic, for this list, let's go with the Warp Insect Hive, as that gives you the most melee benefits when confronting your opponent, as it will allow you to reroll the hit and wound roll. Now as far as different psychic abilities go, you can pretty much pick any of them, as all of them are going to have some place within this list. Obviously the easiest ones are either the ones that increase the range of contagions or deal mortal wounds, but you can also go with something like Miasma to give your units more durability, or Putrescent Vitality to give some of your units more output. And with that being said, let's take a look at some of those units that you can benefit with some of those different psychic powers. The first of those units is going to be a troop choice being composed of 10 Poxwalkers. This is nothing special and nothing you're going to really focus on, rather it's just the cheapest troop choice that you can bring with this army list in order to get the points to bring the other things that you want to bring. Now because you have a unit of Poxwalkers, you do have to bring a unit that allows you to bring them, so with that being said, let's take a look at that unit. That unit will be an elite choice of 5 Possessed. The Possessed are actually rather fast moving for the Death Guard forces and have a rather high output within melee thanks to their horrifying mutations. And as such, they'll have a much easier time keeping up with the Demon Prince, not to mention that the Mortarion's Anvil's special stratagem allows units to better heroically intervene, thus making them a much bigger threat. And to wrap up this list, we brought one more fast-moving melee threat, being a fast attack choice of a single folded bloat drone armed with the Flesh Mower. Once again, just a very powerful melee threat that can help you get within range, and even has a rather good time utilizing that Glooming Bloat with something like the Flash Outbreak stratagem. And as you can see, not only is this a melee-focused army, but it's also a rather fast-moving melee-focused army when you consider the mobility that the Death Guard normally have. As such, all of your units outside of those Poxwalkers move rather quickly and get within melee rather quickly as well. And the Selected Plague Company further benefits your melee capabilities so that you can be rather devastating to your different opponents, as each different portion of the Mortarion's Anvil Plague Company does help you out in some way. Now that we know what this list does, let's take a look at the different kits that are needed. The first kit you'll need is a Demon Prince kit. The Nurgle Demon Prince comes in at $37, while the generic one shown actually comes in at $45. Though do keep in mind the generic one does come with those wings, and I don't believe the Nurgle Demon Prince does, that's shown within the army list itself. As such, you may want to go with the more generic one, as not only will it make it a little easier to get those wings, but it'll be more playable in different armies if you choose to try out different Chaos factions in the future. You'll also need one box of Poxwalkers, which will cost you $35, though do keep in mind, because of the Combat Patrol and older kits of the Poxwalkers, you can definitely find them for less, especially if you go to a secondhand website such as eBay, where you can oftentimes find them for $25 or even less than that for a unit of 10 Poxwalkers. And you should also consider the Combat Patrol, as it does include quite a lot of them, as well as some Plague Marines and other units you might find use for, as we saw with the first list within this video. Now after that box of Poxwalkers, you'll need a single box of Possessed. This box would run you $38 and is a rather nice generic choice, as Possessed can be played within different Chaos factions while also being rather reasonable within the Death Guard forces. And finally, the last kit you'll need is going to be the Folded Bloat Drone, which will run you $50. As such, this ends up being our most expensive list, coming in at a total of $160, which can be a little more or a little less depending on which kits you go with and where you decide to source your different kits. Do keep in mind you can really drive down the cost if you go to eBay and pick up some of these units, as I'm sure they're available there. Now if you don't go to eBay and buy everything from one store, purchasing the Nurgle Demon Prince as opposed to the generic one, and you get a 15% discount, you can get it down to as low as $136, a rather reasonable amount and compares rather well to some of the other choices. So even the most expensive build for the Death Guard out of these three different lists is reasonably cost efficient in comparison to many other armies. As such, this is kind of the benefit and the detriment of the Death Guard, being that it's rather hard to build very diverse lists due to the points cost of different Death Guard models, making it rather restrictive when you're selecting models to put within an army list. However, on the other hand, due to their high points cost, it is a rather inexpensive army, especially if you go with things like the Mephitic Blighthaulers, which have an incredibly low price tag. And as such, you'll have to find a way to balance out these different factors, especially at 500-point games, as that's where it's definitely the hardest to build a very creative list. However, as you've seen here, it's definitely possible to build 3 different lists, utilizing kind of the same ingredients, combined in different ways. Now once you get to 1,000 points or even 2,000 points, you can really experiment with the different units that you include, and you get a lot more freedom and liberty to play with a bigger variety of different models, thanks to expanded point cost, which is felt even at 1,000 points. And do tell me in the comments below which of these 3 lists did you find the most interesting, and would you make any changes to any of these 3 lists, and if so, what would those changes be? And as always, if you've enjoyed the content, like and subscribe, as it really does help the channel out. And if you get the opportunity, please do share the channel, as that not only massively helps the channel, but also helps the people who may discover it and benefit from the content. I would also like to give a quick shout out to my patrons. You guys are awesome people. Thank you very much for supporting the channel. And regardless if you're a patron or not, thank you for watching and have a great day.